Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Fenris here with the first analysis video for Night Owl Musings. If you'd like to learn more about this channel, please take a look at a short introductory video I made. The link will be below. In this video, I'd like to go through and take a look at the development of the three protagonists in the first, according to release date, Star Wars trilogy: Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and Leia Organa. I will also compare their characterization in the original trilogy to the sequel trilogy, which offers a continuation of their storylines. I'll go one by one and we'll explore their arcs in the original three movies, A New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi, and then see how the sequel trilogy, at least thus far in The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, has progressed their story through the 30-year interim. Why do this? Well, first of all, I'm a Star Wars fan and love consuming, analyzing, and discussing this franchise. I'm an old man, so my first real introduction to Star Wars in the theaters was when my dad took me to see The Empire Strikes Back. While I was technically alive when the original Star Wars debuted, I would have only been a toddler. Unfortunately, Empire confused me at times on that first viewing because I was still too young to grasp some of the themes and nuances, and I was a little lost on the context since I hadn't seen its predecessor. But it did draw me into that universe and the story and characters, and as a kid I grew up with the original trilogy as classics I would revisit over and over. Secondly, I think this topic offers an interesting perspective on the main protagonist that first captured people's imaginations and initiated this franchise. These three, Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and Princess Leia, have forever imprinted themselves on the cultural lexicon, and they've influenced and inspired people of all ages for many decades. It gives us a chance to both analyze the traits that make them who they are, as well as examine how their past shaped their future destinies. And yes, I know the sequel trilogy has yet to be completed until later this year, but at this point two of the characters are deceased, though there is the strong possibility that one will be returning in the form of a Force ghost, and in the case of the third, the actress portraying her has sadly passed away, so her character's involvement will necessarily be diminished. Rest in peace, Carrie Fisher. You made Leia a true princess and inspiration. Finally, this analysis will allow me to delve into two topics that are dear to my heart: writing and films, and we will be able to scrutinize both during the course of this discussion. To really get at the root of some matters, I will sometimes have to get meta and go beyond the in-universe explanations that are on the screen. Thus, I will be incorporating the decisions made by the people involved in the making of the films featuring these characters into this presentation. So let's get to it. We'll begin with Han Solo. Han has always been a personal favorite of mine. When I was younger, he edged out Luke because I admired him just like any other kid would. And what's not to like? He was cool. He was a smuggler and a gunslinger who didn't have to live by the rules, but ultimately a good guy. I like being funny, or at least attempting to, and making people laugh, and Han had the best jokes and lines, even in the face of danger. And hey, he even got the girl in the end. Han is first presented to us as a foil for Luke. Luke is a compassionate hero, someone who would willingly sacrifice himself for friends, family, or a cause. He genuinely cares about others. Han, on the other hand, is much more pragmatic and cynical. He's selfish and only cares about a few things: his self, his best friend, and his ship. Oh, and money. A lot of their relationship in this first film is the clash between these two worldviews, and it helps to shape both of their development throughout the original trilogy. In the audience's first minutes with Han, inside the Mos Eisley Cantina, we learn quite a few things about him. He's a pilot, captain of the ship the Millennium Falcon. He's a smuggler, a rogue, someone who operates outside of Imperial law. He's confident to the point of arrogance and has an air of bravado about his skills. He's a scoundrel who fits right into the environment of the cantina. Han is the audience's guide into the underbelly of the Star Wars universe. Why would such a skilled pilot of the fastest ship in the galaxy want to take such a lowly job from two Outer Rim people who are obviously on the run? Based on Luke's reaction, Han seems to be price gouging them. But why do this at all and risk not getting paid or getting tangled up with whoever is after them? The audience finds out soon enough. Han is in a bit of trouble with a local crime lord, Jabba the Hutt, to whom he's in debt for dropping a shipment. Therefore, we get some explanation for his focus on money as not just pure greed and taking advantage of some helpless people, but rather his desperation to save his own skin. Han's capability is also shown in these introductory scenes. He's confronted by Greedo, a bounty hunter looking to cash in on Han as Jabba's put a price on his head. Han remains cool and collected when confronted at blaster point, and in the version I will always hold as canon, gets a jump on his would-be captor. One can infer that this isn't the first time Han Solo has stared down the business end of her blaster, and that he's a quick draw and a great shot. And his casual way of throwing some money at the bartender hints at a sardonic wit that he has developed to deal with the life he leads. This casualness about taking a life also demonstrates the world Han lives in and how it has forged this man into a callous outlaw. It's obvious that Han has killed before and won't hesitate to again, especially when cornered.
Kid, I've flown from one side of this galaxy to the other. I've seen a lot of strange stuff, but I've never seen anything to make me believe there's one all-powerful force controlling everything.
This quote, like many in A New Hope, packs a lot of information into a few concise statements and allows for some initial characterization. Han is older than Luke and much more well-traveled. This has made him practical and distrustful, someone who takes things at face value. He trusts his own skills, though even he is self-deprecating about them. Han does not harbor any illusions of being a hero. He's just a guy trying to get by and survive in this crazy galaxy. Not only that, but it shows how Han is very much against the idea of fate or destiny. He does not like being controlled, which is something that will come up frequently during his progression in the trilogy. Han doesn't outright state that he doesn't believe there are Jedi or people who use the Force, but the strong implication is that he thinks they follow a religion that is outdated and outlandish, sort of like a bizarre cult. It could be inferred that Han probably has never seen a Force user close up, so he only has stories to go by. Han believes in the physical, not the spiritual. Solo is very much anti-authoritarian as he doesn't want any constraints on his independence. He certainly lives an independent life. He has the freedom of a ship, he isn't tied down with a family or even friends outside of Chewbacca, and he lives outside of the law in normal society. It also is partly why he's a loner, as joining any organization, whether it be political, military, religious, or other, would be a losing trade-off in his mind of freedom for boundaries, independence for responsibility. Unlike Luke, he isn't idealistic in looking to champion a cause, but rather take care of himself and carve out a comfortable life. But while he may hate authority, Han is smart enough to recognize wisdom. He bristles whenever Obi-Wan voices his opinion, though he does usually see the logic in it and goes along with it. However, he grouses and refuses to follow anything Luke has to say as he sees him as inexperienced and naive. And he loudly dismisses any and all orders from Leia, who is equally, if not more, assertive and actually holds a position of power above him. Again, this hints at another attribute of Han. He dislikes the class system and doesn't want to follow the orders of a princess. And Luke is able to sway him with the promise of money. Again, the self-serving reassurance of freedom. I love this scene, it always makes me chuckle. And it perfectly demonstrates how Han Solo handles situations. He reads them quickly and then tries to find whatever advantage he can. And he doesn't waste time pondering the risks involved or consequences of his decisions. It's very much a moment-to-moment survival mindset that, when you stop and think about it, implies a lot about how this man grew up. He obviously must have had an erratic childhood and had to learn to make do on his own. People who are stable and comfortable make long-term plans. Han is someone accustomed to having to make critical decisions at a moment's notice and then following through on them to make things happen for himself. Others may downplay Han's intellect, but he does put it to good use. He can analyze a person and their motivations, or assess the current circumstance and determine how best to leverage it to his benefit. When he finally receives his payment, we are shown a splinter of nagging guilt and remorse as he loads his money. Han is leaving to repay Jabba while all around him the rebels prepare for an all-out assault on the most massive battle station to ever be created in the face of annihilation of their base. This is reinforced not only by his brief exchange with Chewie, where he seems to be almost convincing himself of his decision, but also his farewell to Luke, where he confronts an opposing idealistic viewpoint. It's a telling moment as Han demonstrates that he isn't inflexible. Luke has now earned his respect as a fighter during their recent adventures, and deep down he holds some, dare I say, admiration for Luke's commitment to the rebellion. Han shows this both by calling Luke by his name instead of the demeaning kid, and by offering a good luck in the form of "May the Force be with you," which, as we know, is not something he believed in at the beginning of the movie. And in the climatic battle, as Luke, the lone X-Wing left to take out the Death Star, is about to be killed by Vader, Han has supposedly had a change of heart and swoops in to give him the chance he needs to succeed. So, we've seen the genesis of change in Han Solo, and the movie ends with him seemingly happy about his decision to stay with his newfound companions. However, as The Empire Strikes Back opens, we see the natural repercussions of this change of heart. Captain Solo is helping the Rebel Alliance and commands respect with its members. Han is now part of something larger than himself, and he willingly helps out with tasks such as setting markers. However, he's still concerned with his well-being. In fact, early on he says he needs to leave to pay off his bounty, as the price on his head and run-ins with bounty hunters are making him anxious. And who can blame him? So now we see a man struggling to change, but still having doubts about the direction he is taking. Han is a valuable asset to the Rebels since he's used to getting things done and taking care of them himself, so he's much more proactive. And due to this difference, he doesn't have much patience for his colleagues, especially with the lack of diligence around making sure Luke is back safely. An argument could be made that he is there more for Luke and Leia's sake than a strong belief in the Rebels' fight. Han's friendship with Luke has deepened, so much so that he risks his life to find him lost out on the ice planet of Hoth. I really want to make note of this here. Luke is now probably the only other being other than Chewbacca that Han trusts and would risk his life for. He and Luke share easy banter. Han rushes out to almost certain death to find Luke in a dark snowstorm. I mean, these guys have shared adventures and really rely on and respect each other. His relationship with Leia, however, remains contentious, but in a more flirtatious manner. He masks his own vulnerability in relation to her with swagger and sarcasm. It's clear Han has feelings for the princess, but is unsure she would return them and he fears the rejection. She isn't some girl he met casually in a bar or port somewhere, but something more, and he's afraid of losing this chance at a deeper relationship. So he uses a combination of humor and self-assurance to broach the subject, but in a way where he isn't really putting himself out there. His actions show that he cares about her a lot now. When the forces of the Empire attack the Rebel base, what's his first thought?
You alright?
Why are you still here?
Heard the command center's been hit.
You got your clearance to leave.
Don't worry, I'll leave. First I'm gonna get you to your ship.
He immediately goes to personally ensure Leia is okay. And then he insists on getting her out of there and stays by her side to see that she's safe, since he knows she would stay until the bitter end. It's driven home even more in the second movie that Han is someone who takes risks and is used to having his wits and some luck allow him to escape by the skin of his teeth. But there is some method to the madness. He reminds the Imperial Star Destroyers chasing the Falcon that space is a 3D battlefield. He knows that an asteroid field, while seemingly suicidal to navigate safely, offers protection and evens the odds for a small freighter pursued by the might of the Empire. However, for all of Han's ingenuity, most of it is born out of his own short-sightedness and hubris. He's overhauling the Falcon when the Imperials attack, and so his hyperdrive is out of commission when they need to escape. He dodges annihilation or capture by ducking into an asteroid field, but then lands in the mouth of a beast. Even when the hyperdrive fails to work again while coming out of the asteroid field, Han's ego still is fully in effect. But he does still keep his wits about him, assesses the situation quickly, and has an answer given what he has to work with. And it works. As Leia says, he does have his moments. He cleverly hides his ship in plain sight and camouflages himself in the garbage. But again, Han is blinded by ego and so sure of his clever gambit that he doesn't even realize he's picked up a ruthless bounty hunter on his tail who also thought of his scheme. His plans go awry when he thinks an old friend will provide a safe haven to finally fix his ship and allow them to rendezvous with the rest of the Rebel fleet. Perhaps this is why Han Solo has this loner attitude. The one time we see him trust and rely on someone from his past, he's betrayed in the worst way. It's not entirely Lando's fault, and the audience witnesses the might of the Empire being brought to bear on someone, especially by the Sith Lord Vader. Who can really think to stand in his path? The audience sees the moment Leia angrily alluded to earlier, the moment where Han Solo's luck runs out. It's not so much that he was outmatched or outsmarted, but he's deceived by Lando. Han's self-confidence is his blind spot, and therefore he couldn't conceive of being fully betrayed by his former associate. But through it all he keeps a brave face, even as his world crumbles around him. Torture doesn't break him, he still makes quips, and he retains enough strength to slug his old friend for his treachery. However, it does show how his relationship with Leia has grown. He feels comfortable dropping his guard and showing some weakness and doubt in her company. And instead of just thinking of how to extract himself from the situation, he wants to protect Leia. The outlaw is actively demonstrating how he cares for others. Can we just take a moment to admire how badass Han Solo is? The doors slide open, revealing Darth Vader, the second most feared being in the entire galaxy. Near the end of the second movie in the trilogy, the audience has witnessed firsthand how menacing and powerful Vader is. He's force-choked his own officers, strangled a ship captain with one hand, defeated Obi-Wan, and has hounded the rebels at every turn relentlessly. And yet Han, without any hesitation, pulls his blaster and shoots him. He doesn't cower in fear, he doesn't flinch, he's pure instinct. Aside from Luke Skywalker, he's the only person we see stand up to and even attempt to fight Vader, and he has zero force powers. It's not all brave heroics for Han. He and Leia developed their relationship and kindled their romance while being hounded by the Empire. It has taken a while for these two strong-willed, independent people to lower the walls they've built for themselves, though for different reasons. Han is a survivor, and given his line of work, he needs to be hardened or it could cost him his life. Leia may have grown up in a more privileged environment, but she has been honed at a young age to be an instrument in the downfall of the Imperial regime. Neither one has let their guard down for another person in a long time, possibly ever. They share a tender moment in the Millennium Falcon while they repair it in the cave. Han is enough of a force that he can break down Leia's barriers that she has, and he calls her out on the fact that she's drawn to him because he isn't like the other men she knows. He's not a straight-laced nice guy. And this culminates in the scene where he's frozen in carbonite as they express this love verbally. Not only has Solo melted the heart of the Ice Princess, but he's opened up himself as well. Finally, in The Return of the Jedi, the audience witnesses the completion of Han's arc. He starts the movie in a position of vulnerability. Han is suffering from being frozen in carbonite, so he can't see and is also disoriented and weak. He now has to trust and rely on his friends to do his fighting for him. The smuggler gets to experience the benefits of having a community of friends, people who care about you and have your back when you're down. This should be an uncomfortable position for the old Han, feeling helpless and having to depend on others. But instead of insisting he's okay and can handle himself or covering with an air of bravado, Han expresses his appreciation for them coming to rescue him. Perhaps because this is the first time in a long time, or possibly ever, that he has people stand up for him and be there for him in a time of need. I doubt Han has had many people have his back over the years other than Chewie. Similarly, Han is now fully invested in the cause as he is a general and a full-fledged member of the Rebel Alliance. Not only that, but he is putting himself out there willingly. General Solo will lead a strike team down to the forest moon of Endor to disable the shield generator and allow for the ships to attack and destroy the new Death Star before it can wreak havoc upon the galaxy. This is a dangerous and important mission, and the fact that Han had volunteered for it himself, without being cajoled with money or fame, shows his commitment. He's no longer a bystander only looking out for himself. Han Solo has gotten off the sidelines in this conflict. On a romantic level, Han demonstrates his love for Leia throughout the movie. He's constantly concerned for her well-being, and his natural inclination is to safeguard her as best he can. Not that she really needs it. And Han has matured in this area as well. He no longer chides Leia and pushes her buttons. Instead, he is more sincere and caring. Even when Han witnesses Luke and Leia having a connection and his misinterpretation of their tender moment together, he doesn't react in a hot-headed fashion. He doesn't immediately challenge Luke to a fight. He doesn't close up and cut himself off from Leia so he doesn't get hurt. Instead, in a brief interaction, we witness another big moment for Han as a character. He brings it up calmly to Leia after the battle is over and the rebels have won. Han is extremely vulnerable. He's completely in love with Leia now and finally sees someone he could live with for the rest of his life. But he's willing to step aside without any quips, without a blow-up or fight, because Han now realizes that this is Leia's choice, and ultimately he wants her to be happy. How great is this? Han is still an excellent fighter, a capable guy and a wisecrack, but now he's also principled, a loyal friend, and a compassionate partner. This is the story of a cynical loner who finds belonging, who grows and evolves and becomes a better person for it. And in the end, he carves a better life for himself because of his change. He is part of the victorious rebellion. He now has old friends and new friends that he can rely on, and he and Leia are together in love. In The Force Awakens, we now see Han Solo after 3 decades have passed, and oh, he's back to being a smuggler. During the course of the movie, we find out that Han has lost the Millennium Falcon, left Leia, quit the New Republic he helped fight for, reverted to being a smuggler again, and abandoned his son to turn evil under the influence of a nebulous dark overlord. He's regressed to being how he was when we first encountered him in that Mos Eisley cantina. He is much more the Han in A New Hope than an older version of the man we left in Return of the Jedi. Actually, this is incorrect. He's much more of a loser now, having walked away from so much and now seems befuddled and foolish, though he remains cocky and spouting quips. Underlying all of this is a sort of weariness. Whether this was the result of the actor or character is up to the audience. Even when the audience first encounters Han Solo, about a third of the way through the movie, he states that he used to be Han Solo, so even he acknowledges that he's fully shed his former self. I suppose some could look at this characterization and accept it at face value. People don't really change, and Han was bound to be drawn back to smuggling, chasing both adventure and galactic credits. Being the independent bad boy he was, it was unrealistic to think he could actually settle down with the headstrong and idealistic Leia and be comfortable. Of course, it is the spark of that unlikely romance that is a key part of what is considered by many people to be the best Star Wars movie to date. Is it so implausible that the princess and the pirate could live happily ever after? It wouldn't have to be a fairy tale versions. There'd be fights, compromises, stress, but also joy, respect, and love. So who is this Han Solo, and what has 3 decades done with him? Instead of evolution, we witness de-evolution. What caused this? We don't get much in the way of explanation, but a throwaway line. Once his son Ben turned to the dark side, apparently Han just threw up his hands and gave up. He left his son, his wife, and his new life just to jaunt around the galaxy smuggling again. So let's look at Han Solo where we left him in Return of the Jedi. Supposedly he and Leia wed, they have a son, Ben. Ben is found to be Force sensitive and goes to train with Uncle Luke at his new Jedi Academy. Remember, this happens over many years as we find out, not through the movie which is vague, that Ben turns to Kylo when he's around 23 years old. So Han has now been a husband and father for 2 decades. His son then turns to the dark side, slaughters his peers, leaves his uncle for dead, and joins a new version of the Empire. And this suddenly incites Han to hop in a ship with Chewie and start smuggling again? I guess the implication, which is all the audience has as this is not explained at all in The Force Awakens, is that Han and Leia must have been bad parents and terrible spouses to one another. These troubles at home provided the initial cracks in young Ben's personality that Snoke was able to pry open wider as he corrupted the boy over years. Also, Han's return to smuggling is even more of a slap to the face when you think about it. In the original trilogy, the audience has already seen and heard about the Empire, and they are presented as a tyrannical, evil government. Therefore, Han being a smuggler who works against Imperial law paints him as somewhat of a good guy. Sure, he definitely is not a hero, he's a criminal. But he's disobeying the same administration that the rebels are, and so he still appears as a good guy in doing so. But now? He goes back to doing criminal activity against the very organization he helped fight for years before? Before he was circumventing a totalitarian regime, but now he's working against a peaceful democracy? The implication is that in the original trilogy, Han's smuggling may have indirectly helped people get resources they normally couldn't under the stringent Imperial rule. For a price, of course. But in the sequel trilogy, are we supposed to think that the New Republic creates such scarcity that there is a need for a large black market that works underground? I mean, it's one thing that he and Leia's relationship has gotten so bad that it twisted their son and he abandoned them both, but now he actively works against the New Republic he fought to put in power? It's not enough to leave Leia, but he also has to undermine the institution she's a part of? Additionally, doesn't it help to not draw much attention to yourself when smuggling? How does former General Han Solo, hero of both Death Star battles, a decorated New Republic officer, stay inconspicuous? Especially with his iconic ship and partner. That'd be like Douglas MacArthur smuggling contraband across the border after World War II. How would he honestly expect to get away with it, and why would any criminal trust him and not immediately think he was working undercover? Of course, maybe he isn't so famous after all. When Rey and Finn meet Han, they don't recognize him at all. They're also confused as to whether he's a smuggler or war hero of the rebellion. They don't even identify the Falcon, a unique ship that was at the forefront of the destruction of both Death Stars. Apparently, Han also didn't gain any wisdom in his old age. When we encounter him aboard his vessel, he has two clans who tried to swindle. Both discover his scheme and arrive simultaneously for retribution. And what kind of plan was this anyways? How would it have possibly worked out for him? At least with Jabba there was a plausible explanation for his debt. He was afraid of being boarded and jettisoned his cargo. It's a calculated play by someone who's familiar with risk. But in this version, he's just plain dumb. Hey Chewie, let's borrow money from two gangs and hope they don't find out, while I'll only make enough to pay one back. Even if he only did it with one group, all it accomplishes is an advance that nets out when he receives payment. And it just adds more risk, since if anything happens during his transaction, that will make it harder to pay it back. Did he really need this money right away, that he couldn't wait to collect it himself when he delivered the cargo? My guess is that J.J. Abrams and company were hoping we'd be smiling with nostalgia and not think too hard about the situation, just enjoy the spectacle. Look everyone, Han is dressed like he was in A New Hope, and he's a smuggler with Chewie, and now he's back on the Falcon, and he's in debt to gangsters again and in trouble. Oh Han, remember in the original trilogy when Han was on the run from Jabba and his bounty hunters? Here he is again everyone, remember? It's funny to see Han Solo as the narrator of this film, an exposition dump for Rey and Finn, and by extension the audience. I doubt many would picture Han as a historian. However, since the script calls for Luke to be out of the picture and Leia not to appear yet, then it is up to the remaining member of the trio to act in this role. When asked if he knows what happened to Luke, Han says he has only heard some rumors. Han and Luke haven't spoken at all? In years? And the way he says it.
A lot of rumors. Stories. People that knew him best think he went looking for the first Jedi temple.
I know J.J. Abrams likes mystery boxes, but this vague dialogue by Han seems out of place. He's Luke's best friend and family since it's presumed he and Leia were wed at one point. Isn't he one of those? It's a clunky line that is more for the audience than the character. Han needs to be lectured like a little boy by Maz. He's just been running away from everything for so long and has to be reprimanded by her to go face Leia. So now he's neither the hot-headed loner who would follow his own heart, nor is he the changed man who can accept love and friends. He's just a lost loser who needs to be told what to do. And then all of a sudden we get a 180-degree turn as Han reunites with Leia. It's a tender scene between two people with a lot of history. He seems to be truly regretful, which makes it even more frustrating. Why haven't you come back yet? No visits? No communication? If he hadn't gotten tangled up with Rey, Finn, and BB-8, how much longer would he have hid from his wife, the threat of the First Order that she's facing alone, and his dark side son who is a leader in it? Han also wakes from his stupor and finally decides to be proactive about his only child. He goes into the heart of the enemy to confront him. It's a foolish move, a bold move, and reminiscent of the true Han Solo of old. It again makes you wonder why he never tried anything sooner, when presumably Snoke wouldn't have had much of a hold on young Ben. Han settles into the role of mentor, father figure, and throws in his trademark wisecracks. He's a bit of a nostalgia along for the ride with the new protagonists. If his character seems inconsistent in The Force Awakens, I chalk it up more to writing in service of the other characters. The new protagonists need a bump and he's there for them. I can't honestly say that the scene on the bridge didn't affect me. By the reaction in my theater, I'm sure it affected most members of the audience. It's a poignant moment between father and son, and is the defining moment for Kylo Ren in the first part of the trilogy. But still, I wonder how it is they got to that place and why things turned out as they did. By the end of 2 movies, I still have little understanding of what Ben's motivations are, what drives him. And just using the movies, I have no idea why 2 strong people couldn't protect their only child from darkness. I find it so puzzling how Han, Leia, Uncle Luke, and Uncle Chewie could have one child between all of them turn out so twisted and bad. There seems to be a lot of love and care there between the 4 of them, not to mention possible visits from Force ghosts such as Anakin, Yoda, or Obi-Wan, as well as Uncle Lando. Maybe Episode 9 will shed some light on the matter, but heading into the last movie of the trilogy, I'm still confused as to Kylo Ren's desires, fears, wants. Oh well. And this is how we end our story with Han Solo. We get some reaction to his death from Chewie, Leia, and Kylo in The Force Awakens, but no funeral or acknowledgement in the follow-up episode, The Last Jedi. At least he made one more attempt at redemption and tried to be a father at the end, but tragically it was too little, too late. Is this the story of Han Solo that needed to be told? Well, if we step back, things might make more sense than finding a coherent in-universe explanation. The Force Awakens was the very first Star Wars movie to be released under new management at Lucasfilm and is part of the Disney brand. I'm sure there were a lot of expectations and pressure put on the creators. They needed to have a winner out of the gate. And if you look at The Force Awakens, it pushes all the right buttons in terms of echoing the original trilogy, especially A New Hope. And what better way to do that than to include the original trilogy main characters as part of the cast of the new films? It's a surefire way to draw back any longtime fans who may have been put off by the prequel films. And in terms of Han Solo, why not take one of the, if not the most, beloved characters from the original trilogy and give him back to fans in his original packaging? Nostalgia is a powerful drug, especially for a fandom such as Star Wars. Han is dressed basically as he was in A New Hope. He's a free man back hopping around the galaxy with both Chewie and a blaster at his side. And he's still getting himself into messes but cracking wise. What could be better? But to counter this and add gravitas, he's killed off in a scene that tugs at the heartstrings. Han Solo serves his purpose, both to kick off the new trilogy and era of Disney Star Wars movies, and for the actor portraying him. So what is with this story of Harrison Ford hating Han Solo and wanting him killed off? I see this crop up from time to time, and it intrigued me, so I wanted to try and find the whole story. But the issue is there isn't a clear explanation, at least not that I could find. One has to piece together some interviews and conjecture like a jigsaw puzzle. After Star Wars came out, Ford was happy doing press for it and was enthusiastic about his character. Similarly, when looking at him in interviews for The Empire Strikes Back, he's still very positive and passionate when speaking about the franchise. It's only during the final movie, Return of the Jedi, where Harrison Ford's demeanor changes on the subject and he seems much more distant from the character, and frustrated that Solo did not die in some grand sacrifice during the movie. So what happened? Well, Harrison Ford had struggled as an actor for many years before he had a major part in American Graffiti, directed and co-written by none other than George Lucas. Lucas originally did not want Ford to even audition for a part in Star Wars, as he wanted to cast unknown actors. Ford's agent set him up as a carpenter on set, one of the many part-time jobs he performed to make ends meet as he built his acting career, an employee that eventually worked. Harrison Ford was hired to play Han Solo. The success of Star Wars propelled him into the spotlight and made him a major star. However, between episodes 4 and 5, Ford only starred in Force 10 from Navarone, a World War II sequel that was met with mixed reviews. He also had some small parts in Apocalypse Now and The Frisco Kid. However, between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, Ford was in 2 major films, Blade Runner and Raiders of the Lost Ark. Whereas Ford considers Han Solo as a side character in the original trilogy, here were 2 offerings where he played the lead role. So going back to Han Solo for a third time now, relegated to a side mission with cutesy Ewoks, may have soured Ford on the experience. Perhaps that motivated him suggesting that Han Solo die in a sacrificial move, such as blowing up the new Death Star instead, but at the cost of his life in the Millennium Falcon. This would be a much bigger end for the actor than jungle hijinks on Endor, and it would allow some finalities he could distance himself from Star Wars and move on to other projects. But was it purely driven by ego? I don't believe so. Even though he has a reputation for being cranky on set, from what I've seen, Ford does come across as a sincere actor. He really digs into his roles and explores those characters and what makes them tick. He was constantly challenging the directors and writers on Star Wars about Han Solo, most famously in changing his response to Leia near the end of Empire from "I love you too" to "I know." So perhaps Ford looked at Han Solo's development in the first 2 films and thought the character had gone as far as he could. Instead of seeing the brash smuggler settle into a more comfortable but boring routine, he thought it would be more impactful to have him go out in a blaze of glory. And losing one of the main trio in the final film would have certainly made an impact and driven home the cost of war to the audience. But Lucas was telling a fairy tale, not a gritty war drama, and he had decided that he wanted to end on a happy note to delight the audience. So Solo did his part, which in my book was still important, but did not perform combat flying or confront Vader and the Emperor head on. I think at this point Ford really was done with the character of Han Solo and was ready to move on to bigger things that, ironically, this role had provided for him. And he certainly did that, having a long career in Hollywood with many memorable performances. Approximately 30 years later, and enough time had passed that Harrison Ford was no longer solely associated with Han Solo. When approached about appearing in The Force Awakens, here's what he has to say.
I enjoyed playing the character in the first. I enjoyed playing the character in the second. By the time we got to the third, I thought there was possibly no useful purpose for this character except as a human sacrifice. It's not that I wanted Han Solo to die. I wanted Han Solo to be able to lend some significant emotional weight to the story.
Ford was back to insisting that Han Solo make a big sacrifice, something that would help drive the new characters. And that's exactly what he got. Now, I'm in no way suggesting that Abrams outright capitulated to Ford's demands, but maybe they just dovetailed nicely. Han Solo dies, and Harrison Ford can finally close the book on this character. JJ gets to surprise audiences in this initial outing by having an emotional, impactful death in Act 3 to one of the original protagonists. And this death comes at the hands of his new antagonist, Kylo Ren, helping to solidify him as an evil foe. It also furthers his character's development, as this execution was supposed to purge any lingering light side tendencies in him. It's an on-the-nose representation of cutting ties to his former self and his complete acceptance of the dark side of the Force. How should Han Solo have been developed? I've seen quite a few people online postulate that since Han was a general in Return of the Jedi, he should have remained as a senior officer in the New Republic's military in the sequels. I don't really agree with this conjecture. The military is always characterized as a strict, disciplined organization that adheres to codes and rules. This doesn't sound like Han at all, who likes to fly by the seat of his pants and improvise, someone who, as we've just seen, inherently dislikes authority and control. As a commander in the field, Han works best when he is alone or with a small group. He wouldn't always follow orders, instead electing to react to the situation and forge his own path. He still had the freedom to do this while part of a motley rebel force, a band of people with the desire to combat the Empire, but not an orderly military unit with a thick book of rules and procedures. Han could achieve results, which worked when the rebellion was the underdog who took risks and had to almost rely on them since they were facing overwhelming odds in terms of manpower and firepower. But as the ruling power, Han's antics would probably create bigger issues for the New Republic than solve. If instead of out in the field, Han was a decorated high-ranking member of the New Republic Armed Forces back at the Capitol, the picture is even more absurd. I can't imagine him sitting behind a desk filling out papers, attending strategy meetings, and determining supply routes and troop distribution. I think he would be quickly bored and dissatisfied with the whole situation. However, what is something unique that Han Solo brings to the table? What differentiates him from the other members of the Rebel Alliance, that ragtag group of idealists and political leaders? Perhaps it's his history as a smuggler, as a former member of the underbelly of society. He has a lot of contacts and some standing in the more seedier circles of the galaxy. I could foresee Han becoming a leader in the New Republic, taking on more responsibility as he continues to mature and grow from his former selfish self. However, I picture him in the role of heading up an arm of their intelligence community, forming and using a network of underworld associates and spies to stay abreast of any potential threats to the fragile government as it rebuilds from the shattered remains of the Empire. It would both allow Han to solidify his newfound commitment to family, friends, and an ideology, but also give him the freedom and excitement to take off once in a while and jet around the galaxy on business trips. Han wouldn't be running away or denying his past, but instead now capitalize on his inherent history and strengths to use them in a positive way to preserve freedom and peace. He and Chewie could visit various locales and meet with high-value informants or recruit some new agents. Han would know these people and what motivates them: money, power, or whatever. Perhaps sometimes they would discreetly deal with incidents of note before they became a bigger headache for the New Republic, or when a situation requires something a little more gray in nature to accomplish in order to keep the government's hands clean. Afterwards, he could always return home and be a loving father and husband. This would also change his role in The Force Awakens. Because Han has regressed to being a smuggler again, a petty criminal who's abandoned his family and carelessly lost his ship, which was his home, and an extension of his own self, he only falls into the story through an incredible coincidence. He and Chewie just happen to be in orbit around Jakku when Rey and Finn fly out of there on the Millennium Falcon, and luckily Kylo's Star Destroyer has disappeared. This chance meeting ultimately leads him to reuniting with Leia and then confronting his wayward son in a tragic moment. However, if Han had the future I postulated, he would meet up with the new heroes in a more organic fashion. I would envision Han would already have heard rumors and whispers of the rise of the First Order, and along with Leia, is desperately trying to convince the New Republic that they're a credible threat. Incidentally, a few scenes between the two talking about this could have given some much needed exposition about the galactic state of affairs for the audience. He would also be both personally and professionally invested in finding the missing piece of the map to Luke, his friend and brother-in-law, and a key factor in defeating this new menace. Therefore, it would make sense that during their escapades, Finn and Rey, who are in possession of BB-8 and the MacGuffin map, would stumble across Han and Chewie, perhaps on the trail of the map itself or First Order agents searching for it, and be outright captured by them. Or maybe their chance involvement in this plot gets them mixed up in one of Han's covert operations, and they are led to him by his associates. From there, he could still give some exposition about the map and Luke and the Jedi before taking them to Leia and the Resistance, but the circumstances are very different. Han would be more of an authority as well as a legend, someone who very much in the know and thus a good bridge for Rey, and consequently the audience, in drawing us more into the state of the galaxy and what the stakes are. He would also want to engage with Finn, who is in the unique position of intimately knowing the inner workings of the First Order. Han would want to pump him for information on this new enemy, and could offer advice and insight to help Finn's transition to life outside of being a stormtrooper. When he returns them to the Resistance base, his reunion with Leia is a bit different, but with still the same tones. She's worried about him going out on missions, but still understands taking the risk as she is also committed to the cause. They are both broken by their estrangement with their son and the events that happen, and are trying to hold their marriage together even though they have suffered loss and regret. It makes for a much more interesting dynamic and could have gone further in explaining to audiences the differences between the Resistance and the Republic. But the book is now closed on Han Solo. Happy trails, Space Cowboy. The character of Leia presents an interesting dichotomy when looking at her progression throughout the original trilogy. As one of the few prominent women in those movies, she repeatedly fills a lot of roles that since the 70s have become stale tropes, such as love interest or damsel in distress. However, Leia is no shrinking violet. As we will see, she's determined, smart, and capable. This combination of traits allows her to take care of herself, and she broke the mold back then by forging her own destiny rather than waiting for her hero to arrive. Throughout the original trilogy, she finds herself in trouble quite frequently, but typically she's able to extricate herself from a situation on her own merits. Therefore, her authority and respect aren't questioned or diminished to the audience. Princess Leia is a compelling figure, and her unique persona contrasts nicely with her two male counterparts. It's the interplay of these three individuals that anchors the core of the movies, as their destinies are intertwined. Right away from the first scenes of Episode 4, the audience learns quite a few things about Princess Leia. Even though she's very young, she's a senator and a princess, so she is established as someone of prominence who can lead. Furthermore, she's also a senior member of the Rebel Alliance, working to overthrow the very government she's a part of. From her demeanor, we can infer her intelligence and strength of character, and even a regal air cultivated from a refined upbringing. And though she is a politician and not a soldier, she isn't helpless. One of her initial scenes has her single-handedly fighting back against the boarding stormtroopers and downing one. Leia's a tough person. We witness this very early on when Vader, an intimidating figure dominating these opening scenes, chokes the captain of her ship with one hand. Soon afterwards, he confronts Leia in the same way, and instead of the diminutive senator shrinking back or acquiescing, she stands toe-to-toe with him and even threatens him. This demonstrates that not only does she possess power and influence, but more importantly, the fortitude to exercise it to protect what she deems important. It is quite apparent from the beginning that Leia is the most mature out of our three protagonists. She is sure in her convictions and will go so far as to fight and die for them. She's caring but also firm and skilled. These traits make her a natural leader. She's where she wants to be, knows what her beliefs are, and is actively working to enact the change she believes is best for the galaxy. Unfortunately, with Leia already fully realized, there isn't much growth left for her to achieve as a character arc. She's already a smart and adept leader who has a strong value system. Her journey throughout the original trilogy is more of a personal one. Despite all of these positive qualities, or perhaps as a product of them, Leia comes across as snobby, cold, and dismissive. In A New Hope, after being captured and brought aboard the Death Star, Leia faces torture and death with her head still held high, ready to sacrifice for her cause. Even when her home world of Alderaan is threatened with billions or trillions of peaceful, innocent civilians' lives at stake, she won't willingly betray the Alliance even though she knows it means her death. It is a hard choice and personally devastating, but she already knows that the success of the rebellion is more important to the lasting livelihood of the galaxy than even an entire planet. She plays a very risky game by lying about where the rebel base is located, which ends up being a smart choice since her captors break their word on the deal immediately anyways. She endures torture at the hands of Darth Vader, a Sith Lord, yet still she won't yield. When we hear Vader tell Tarkin of this, you can even hear a bit of admiration in his voice. What a brave and compelling figure. Similarly, when she is finally rescued in a bumbling attempt by Luke and Han, she immediately assists in blasting guards and trading one-liners. Apparently detention, torture, and the prospect of execution did not diminish her spirit. Leia immediately assumes a role she's familiar with, leader. She naturally attempts to take over control of the operation, but is met with resistance from Han Solo, who is also independent, skilled, and not one to take orders. Once back at the Rebel base, Leia's role is unfortunately diminished for the final act of the movie. However, she still contributes to the story and characters. Before the assault on the Death Star, she both challenges Han's beliefs and offers advice and consolation to Luke. She's a politician, not a pilot, so she won't be fighting in the space battle. As she doesn't directly command the troops, she isn't issuing orders or strategizing tactics. However, Leia does create tension for the audience as she helplessly listens to the pilot's chatter, especially that of Luke Skywalker, as they engage with the enemy. In addition, she continually reminds us of the ticking clock as she watches the screen that shows the Yavin 4 base approaching line of sight of the Death Star. And she serves as the face of what is at stake, the last hope of peace and freedom in the galaxy. And in the final scene, she awards medals to our new heroes, except for one glaring omission. But her serious demeanor is broken as she revels in their achievement, as well as their friendship. For a brief moment, the responsibility that rests on her shoulders can be set aside to actually celebrate a moment of happiness. These characteristics are explored more deeply in The Empire Strikes Back. Right at the beginning of the movie, Leia and Han trade words. He's hinting, and not even subtly, that she has feelings for him. But she doesn't seem to pick up on this, only stating he's a capable fighter and valuable asset to the Alliance. She needs that though, as she still has to make tough decisions, such as closing the blast doors at night for safety, even though Han and Luke are still out in the inhabitable cold. This is a death sentence for them, but Leia again must think of the bigger picture and make the tough but correct choice. It's no wonder she remains cold and distant. Being a leader is a lonely position. Leia is dedicated. She won't leave until those under her command are safe and away, even at the risk of her own life. Han finally has to make her face the hopelessness of the situation and drag her out of there in the nick of time. For the majority of Empire, Leia is situated outside of her comfort zone. She's aboard the Millennium Falcon, an environment she's not used to in her privileged upbringing. Worse, she's with Han Solo and Chewbacca, two individuals that don't recognize her authority like most people she regularly interacts with. Throughout Leia's plotline in this movie, she's shown as practical, bordering on pessimistic when confronted with a problem. The movie draws a contrast between her and Han, two sides of the coin on this matter. Both of them are driven and will find a way to mitigate an obstacle, but in very different fashions. While Leia is more pragmatic and textbook in approaching solutions, Han is more chaotic and relies on his instincts. Eventually, Leia learns to relax and recognize that while Han can be erratic and risky, he does have the determination to get the job done. It's the classic opposites attract, but it is true that Han is like no one Leia has associated with before in her life. And even though he may be a scoundrel, as Leia puts it, she and the audience know that he is still a good guy. And this is what makes him safe, but not boring. And when they aren't trading barbs, they do work well together, both smart, decisive, and capable people. Even with a blossoming romance, Leia still remains sharp. She maintains her distrust of Lando, being wary of his friendly demeanor even though Han seems blinded by a reunion with an old friend. And she has noticeably softened to Han Solo, accepting him as a partner in this adventure and perhaps more. She's opening up. This culminates with her expressing her love for Han publicly in a moment of desperation when she thinks she will lose him forever. Even with all she's been through this movie, Leia is ever the fighter. She grabs a rifle and blasts stormtroopers as she desperately tries to get Han back from Boba Fett. She feels Luke's presence through the Force and turns the Falcon around and flies to rescue him despite the danger. This princess is still not one to be trifled with. This carries over to Return of the Jedi. Leia is introduced to us in this film as a disguised bounty hunter at Jabba's palace. Is very different from the regal person we've seen in the prior two movies. Here Leia has put herself in a very risky situation for her love, Han Solo. She's there with others to rescue him from his carbonite stasis. But the danger of this plan is very real, and Leia's subterfuge is unveiled. When Leia is discovered, she becomes an unwilling slave girl for Jabba. But again, we see that she is not helpless. Leia single-handedly kills this boss of the underworld with her bare hands and escapes her shackles to help out with the rescue mission. Perhaps being with Solo has rubbed off a bit on her. Leia charges off to stop the troopers before they can report the team and jeopardize the mission. But this does lead to a key alliance for the final battle, as it is Leia who reaches out and establishes a relationship with the indigenous Ewoks. And their aid is key in taking down the stormtroopers there to trap Han's team as they attempt to disable the shield generator. Additionally, in a quiet moment before the storm of the final act, Leia discovers her relationship with Luke is deeper than originally thought. She handles this in stride. Consider that on the eve of battle she finds out that her brother is Luke Skywalker, she has force powers, and her father is none other than Darth Vader. Quite a lot to be hit with at once. But Leia is able to absorb these bombshell revelations and ponder the implications. Unlike the past movies, Leia is now in the thick of battle for this confrontation. She shoots and fights against the Imperial troops along with everyone else. In a great turnaround, Han admits his true feelings for Leia, and this time she smirks in response with the "I know." Not only a sweet moment, but great character development for both as they verbalize what they've realized, they've finally met an equal that complements the other. And right afterwards, she is the one who blasts the stormtroopers, even while injured. In all three movies, Leia has wielded a blaster just like her bow. Like her counterparts, Leia ends the original trilogy on a high note, with room for development in the future. Her rebel alliance has triumphed, but there is still work ahead for re-establishing the Republic and snuffing out the remnants of the Empire across the galaxy. She has found a family connection in Luke and love with Han. And, as part of the discovery of her ancestry, a new world has opened up to her in terms of learning about her Force skills. There's a lot for her to build upon going forward. In The Force Awakens, Leia doesn't appear until 2/3 of the way into the movie. She's the leader of the Resistance. The Resistance? What are they resisting against? Since this movie purposely avoids much world building, it's up to the audience to try and connect the dots. No real mention is made of her status with the New Republic. Apparently she's not in any leadership position at all with the government she was a key leader in the fight to institute. And in a surprising turn, Leia is now more of a military leader, heading up a small group of fighters rather than leading a galaxy. Unfortunately, Leia doesn't have much of a role to play in The Force Awakens. She interacts sparsely with the rest of the cast from the Resistance base. Dressed in some nondescript fatigues, she seems withdrawn and weary of her life. Whether this was intended for the character or a product of Carrie Fisher's acting is up for debate, but the spark seems to have gone out of the feisty princess we knew. It's even more perplexing when you consider what she says to Han about Ben. Apparently they both knew for years that their only son was being corrupted by a powerful evil entity. This goes for either of them, but especially Leia. I can't imagine her not immediately going to her son and taking him home, trying to keep him safe and using whatever she could to protect him. Perhaps this is due to the abandonment by 3 men in her life. Her son Ben Solo has turned to the dark side and become a Vader-like terror. Her husband Han has left her to cavort about the galaxy, and her brother Luke has exiled himself from the galaxy. This isn't to say that the Leia we knew couldn't soldier on, but perhaps a loss of her family resulted in a regression in her personal openness, though Leia does remain sharp-tongued as ever. In The Last Jedi, however, Leia changes quite a bit. First, she's now decked in gowns and robes with elaborate hairstyles. It's a nicer change from the drab military-esque gear in The Force Awakens, but it seems a bit out of place. As her group battles for survival, she demonstrates more of the verve the audience expects from this character. But there are still many perplexing issues, starting with the opening escape and the fallout of the fight, moving on to the focus of her involvement in this film, squaring off with Poe Dameron. Let's compare again. A young Leia calmly explaining an orderly plan for escape even as her base is attacked and crumbling around them, versus an older Leia slapping one of her officers in the face in front of everyone. It doesn't really track, and if anything, makes her look less effective. Princess Leia doesn't command respect simply because she's a princess, or her family's powerful and wealthy, or the position she holds in government, and she doesn't use any of those things to flaunt her authority. The people under her command would give their lives for her because she has earned their respect. And she treats her troops fairly and nicely, and the audience sees them show her deference, not out of fear, but because they recognize her talents and place their trust in her. 3 decades ago, she confidently commanded troops in the face of danger, but nowadays she wears elaborate dresses and emotionally slaps her commander? Where did this come from? The scene is also distressing because Leia's decision doesn't make a lot of sense for 3 reasons. Number 1, Leia is the general and leader of the Resistance. Any plan Poe is executing, he would have already discussed with her and she signed off on. This is supported by their dialogue during the battle. Before the attack begins, Leia's words with Poe indicate she already knew his plan and presumably had given at least tacit approval of it. So Poe Dameron had presented to her that as they are fleeing their base, the First Order will show up to stop them. However, he counts on them all just sitting there, launching no ships, nor firing any lasers. Finally, the Dreadnought will arrive, and he will be able to approach it alone in his X-Wing. Even though the First Order is there to exterminate the Resistance, take no prisoners, wipe them all out, Poe is certain that they will let him sit in front of them without firing on him. He will then take out all the cannons on the flat deck of the Dreadnought alone. After that, a straight line of the slowest, most awkward ships in Star Wars history will ever so slowly advance on the Dreadnought, and hopefully no TIE fighters will be launched from all the surrounding Star Destroyers or the Dreadnought itself. Nor will any other command ships fire on these bombers. Then when they finally are directly over the Dreadnought in open space, they will drop their payloads and blow it up, and hopefully not themselves in the process. Oh, and during all of this, the Dreadnought's super lasers on the bottom of the ship, which Poe won't be disabling, won't just aim at the Raddus and blow it to smithereens. And apparently Leia heard all this and said, well, seems risky, but sure, let's do this plan. Set it up. I mean, luckily for Poe, he was right. The First Order did just sit around with all that firepower and let it happen. Number 2, she's reprimanding Poe for ignoring her orders, but Poe isn't the only one on the radio. Again, she's the general and ultimate authority for the Resistance group there. If she wanted them to pull back, Leia gets on the radio and calls them all back. Only Poe had turned off his comm and wouldn't hear, but everyone else would have obeyed orders. And calling the bombers back at this point, after you committed them to the attack, seems pointless. Especially since these slow-moving ships would never have made it back to the fleet before being blown up anyways. Most importantly, this behavior doesn't really track with the headstrong Leia we've seen before. Thirdly, Leia is angry at Poe, but the source of this seems hypocritical. She chastises him for not looking at the bigger picture and the lives that were lost, but isn't she also guilty of this? Because the bigger picture is that his plan did save the lives of herself and everyone else on the ships. If the Dreadnought was still active and finally decided not to target stationary objects, it could decimate the remainder of the Resistance fleet. So Poe made a good decision where, yes, some lives were given, but for the greater good of saving the majority of the Resistance members that were fleeing. What exactly is Leia saying? That no plan is good unless 0 lives are lost? It seems like a very weak foundation to just set up some conflict for Poe, but starts to fall apart with minimum examination, and this occurs at the expense of Leia's character. But now Leia is demoting Poe and angry at him for fighting, citing the losses they incurred as the reason. Did she not expect there to be losses? And since the First Order in this movie can track them through hyperspace, if they showed up again with the Dreadnought, wouldn't they actually blow them all up this time? Especially since there's a tantalizing static base with possible intel to distract them. And Leia seems wanting to teach Poe something, but for what? Does she believe he's the future leader of the Resistance, and consequently the Republic if they win? He's not nearly a senior officer. He's not a politician. Poe is by far and away the best fighter pilot they have, so why would Leia be grooming him out of that position? Clearly, from what we just discussed, he's a terrible tactician, though let me stress again that he's made the best decision in a bad situation, saved only by the sheer written idiocy of the First Order. So a command position doesn't really seem to fit Poe. He's best out there fighting for the cause he believes in and using his skills as a pilot. It's also what he seems to enjoy and gravitate towards as well. There's no indication from Poe that he's looking to move up the chain of command. In fact, he seems very content where he is, using his strongest skill to do his part. Leia's reasoning is very confusing here, as is his demotion. As a captain, Poe isn't responsible for the entire fleet, but only the teams he commands. He isn't supposed to be seeing the full picture and considering it. That's for the generals, admirals, and other command officers.